Hello, welcome back to Black Book Stacks. I'm your host, Hoshonda Sanders, and it has been a little while. Thank you so much for your likes and shares and subscribes. I hope you had a wonderful month of April, National Poetry Month, which once upon a time was such a big deal for me. So I got my start writing poetry, and somehow this month got so busy that I didn't even really devote any time to thinking about how to commemorate it on the channel. So apologies for that, but I had a pretty productive couple of weeks away. Have been reading, of course. So I wanted to just give you guys an update on things I've been reading and some titles I'm looking forward to in May. Among the things that I've been reading that I really, really love, Lose Your Mother by Saidiya Hartman, who is a MacArthur Fellow. This is about her trip to Ghana and essentially the identity of African Americans and how it is shaped by this long legacy of our relationship to the continent of Africa. And the title "Lose Your Mother," which has resonance for me because I have lost my mother. Unfortunately, talks about essentially how your belonging is tied to place, how African Americans are considered to have lost their mothers, or their mother continent, basically the place that birthed their heritage or their identity is disconnected from them. So it's really a great book to savor. It's a little bit heavy, so I haven't really made it that far into it, even though I've been reading it for a little while. I think I would say I'm about halfway through, but lots of really interesting things to think about. I really want to read her entire scholarship, most of the books that she's published, because she's such a good writer. And speaking of scholars and scholarship, there's a book I'm about to mention that's coming out in May that led me to this book, which I don't know how much of the title you can see, but it's called The Sovereignty of Quiet, Beyond Resistance in Black Culture, and it actually came out in 2012. Lose Your Mother came out in, 2007. So these are older books, but what I love about The Sovereignty of Quiet is that the premise is by Kevin Quashie, and the premise is that the way that we think about Black culture in America is being this identity that is very publicly expressive. So to be Black is to be public. To cultivate Black expression is to essentially be very expressive. But there's this disconnect, I think, if you're Black and introverted, as I am, or if you just really love quiet, which I really do, that essentially that if you are like this person who cultivates quiet and the sovereignty of it, that you are somehow disconnected from Blackness, that Blackness also needs to have this very public expressive resistance as part of the equation, when in fact it's possible for quiet to be its own resistance, because the interiority of quiet and the humanity that it restores to Black people who are often dehumanized is its own resisting force, right? Or its own force for resistance, put another way, I guess. Anyway, it's feeding my soul tremendously to read it. The cover is by Whitfield Lovell, Kin 7, Scent of Magnolia, man, just like what an incredible image. And in the book, Queshi, probably butchering his last name, so sorry, kind of makes mention of the art and why it was chosen and what it says. So that's also really great. So I'm reading those things for pleasure. The one book that I finished in April, that came as a surprise. I don't know if it's because I'm writing for Oprah Daily or if it's because I signed up for Oprah Daily or Oprah Insider. No one's paying me to say that. I don't know how this book ended up in my mailbox, but it did. And it came out in 2014. And it was such a good, fun read. I mean, essentially, like, I love self-help. I think anyone who's been watching the channel since I started it or knows me in any way, like, has read me talk. I've talked about this before, how I love self-help books, and actually some of the first books that I read or would sort of gobble up at the library were these self-help books, as I was basically trying to remother myself and also figure out like how to live. And so I just really devour like wisdom, especially from great people, moguls, Black women in leadership. And I learned a lot, not just about Oprah and Gail and Stedman, but also I was just reminded of how to get back to center, right? Because I think in our culture, even in the midst of a pandemic, there's a lot of like striving. There's a lot of I have to be productive, I have to do this, I have to do that. But it's so great to kind of hear through reading Oprah's voice, just to hear some of that wisdom and think about what it means to connect with the self and how that fills you up so that you connect with others. So I really, really enjoyed What I Know for Sure. That was really fun read. Okay, this is coming out in May 18th, The Groundbreaking in American City in Its Search for Justice by Scott Ellsworth. And essentially this is this amazing kind of excavation of a necessary history of the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, which will be in we're in the centennial year for it. Ellsworth was the person who wrote the first sort of major published version of the history of the Tulsa Race Massacre in, I think it was 1986. But he wrote a book called Death of a Promised Land. This is about essentially the story that led to him writing that book, what has basically transpired since that book was written, and basically its influence on the city, trying to really reckon with its history around what was used to be known as the Tulsa Race Riot, right? But a riot has a different connotation now, so it's referred to as the Tulsa Race Massacre. So really, really good book. It's kind of like, it felt like reading like a reading version of like an SVU like kind of crime show, like it was like it's like sort of part documentary. There's some really good like down home narrative in it. Really, really cool. I found out about Kevin Quashi's book from a reference in this book, which is There's a Revolution Outside My Love, Letters from a Crisis, and this was edited by Tracy K. Smith and John Freeman. I think it comes out, I want to say May 11th or thereabouts. There are so many beautiful letters in here that it's hard for me to start with just one. There are also poems. A number of them have already been published or previously published in some form. The collection essentially commemorates the summer of 2020 and racial unrest that unfolded around George Floyd's murder, and codifies that moment that we were in as we all kind of navigated multiple pandemics. And while I guess I would have expected to be a little bit depressed by that, it actually was really fortifying, encouraging to read all the different perspectives, especially the perspectives of people who are not in New York or Los Angeles. No shade to those of us who live on coasts, but there's an emphasis on people who live outside of those cities here, especially those who live in Minnesota or near Minneapolis, where there has been so many incidences of Black people killed by police. So anyway, I really enjoyed it. It really resonated deeply with me. And you can't really make out the names of the people who've been murdered, but their names make up this fist, which is pretty cool. I've been reading this book, The United States of Grace, by Lenny Duncan, a memoir of homelessness, addiction, and incarceration and hope. He is from Philly, and I was born there, so it's been cool to just read about his journey. He wrote a book called Dear Church that was really popular not long ago. So anyway, that's been a cool one. It's coming out May 25th. And last but not least, I'm not sure if this came out already, but We Are Each Other's Harvests by Natalie Bazile, who's the author of Queen Sugar, celebrating African American farmers, land, and legacy. I mean, this is just a beautiful, beautiful book that talks about essentially Black people's relationship to the land. It has incredible photos that of course wouldn't show up when I'm actually showing the interior of the book, but it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous book. There's some reflections from Natalie and others on writing. Natalie writes about basically writing Queen Sugar. There's some excerpts of the book, of that book in here. There are pictures of several generations of farmers in some cases in a family. Just really, really lovely. So that was kind of a cool one to read as well. Those are the books for May, and my kind of April wrap up. I am in the middle of reading Stacey Abrams' While Justice Sleeps. So that's been really cool. It's kind of annoying because she's Stacey Abrams and she does everything well, and it's oh, you also write thrillers that are page turners on top of Saving Democracy. What? That's insane. But it is a true thing that's happening. So that's something really cool to look forward to in May as well. But if you have other titles that you're looking forward to reading in May, I would love to hear about them. Hopefully I'll be back before the end of May with an update for June. But nevertheless, better late than never. Thank you for hanging in there. Thank you for your patience. Looking forward to hearing from you in the comments, and I will see you again soon.